السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Inshallah ta'ala, we are going to begin our second session of the history of Shafi'i Fiqh بإذن الله تعالى. ونسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يتقبل منا صالح الأعمال. But a couple brothers asked to wait for 1 minute, so we'll give them that minute and then we'll go ahead and begin. طيب, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to go ahead and begin. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى التوفيق والسداد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وبعد. We ended our session yesterday, وَلِلَّهِ الْحَمْدِ وَالْمِنَّةِ, speaking on the generation of the Sahaba and their different types of participation and levels of participation in fiqh. Today we're closing that age, and to be more accurate, we're closing with the age of the fitna that happened between the two great Sahaba, Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu ta'ala anhu wa karramallahu wajha, and Sayyidina Muawiyah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Because Ahl Sunnah, we treat them all as one body of authority. During these problems, in the Ummah, many fitan took place. Many new ideologies started to form. But understand this, we, in many different occasions, read the Salaf saying things like, the innovation starts small, then grows. What does this mean? What they're referring to is, if you look back at the origins of most innovation groups, you actually notice that they did not all start for devious purposes. Khuruj, in principle, was to fight injustice, not from the Sahaba. It didn't start from them. It happened due to individuals from the tabi'een that the Sahaba entrusted. Family ties, allegiance. So even the Khawarij, when they first started, they started under the guise of fighting for justice. When the Sahaba fought with one another, a lot of people are not aware that there was a third party that said, we shall not fight. We should not be discussing such ridiculous dunya issues. For indeed we are Muslim. And that is what matters. Our faith is what matters. Not these acts here and there. And there came the birth of irja. When some of the Sahaba fought, each gained support. That was the birth of tashayyu' and nasb. Nasb are those who held animosity towards Ahlul Bayt. Now, just in principle, that's nonsense, but where the Shia went is nonsense as well, so two sides of the same coin. And when philosophy and non-Islamic sciences were exposed in the Ummah, a need to handle this issue also developed, which led to i'tizal. And when two individuals running for political power by supporting opposing governors in their region, in their lands, started to look for ways of religious rivalry. This gave birth to the Jahmiyyah and the Muqatiliyah. And the Jahmiyyah are usually labeled as being the forefathers of the Mu'tazila, and it's not actually historically accurate. They're similar, but in the same way that the Karramiyya and Muqatiliyya are similar. Most of these groups and ideologies even will testify that in their early sources, that which they believe in today cannot be found. This chaos came with its own set of fiqh problems, because these groups and these ideologies turned into gatherings, gatherings turned into communities, communities turned into ideologies, and ideologies turned into laws, verdicts, some of which are the craziest things out there. And if we were to study right now and bring up the history of these groups and mention some of their fiqh opinions, if you're sitting in a chair right now, you'd fall out from laughter. That's how hilarious some of the things that these people would say. But this was noticed early on, and we gave an example to this yesterday, how a fabricator said to Harun al-Rashid, "You can't kill me. I fabricated so many things, you won't be able to find it." And Harun al-Rashid responded by saying, "How do you think we caught you?" We're already in work, because from the younger generation of the Sahaba, as we mentioned with them being involved in writing, they were also involved in preserving. And not only preserving the Quran and Sunnah, but also the methods of fiqh. But bear in mind, these methods were not documented fully yet. But the concepts were there. A young Sahabi might give a verdict, another Sahabi might say, here's a hadith, and he might accept and might argue its validity or the narrator's validity. So concepts were always there, like the concepts of the science of hadith. A lot of people assume that they came later on. They didn't. A lot of people assume that Bukhari went around and found these random statements. He didn't. Before him, there was almost hundreds of books. Muhammad al-Zuhri, who was a scholar, who was also a merchant. A lot of people don't know his story. You see, what we all know him by as being employed by Umar ibn Abdul Aziz to officially document every hadith in existence. This is his famous story. But how did he get the position? You see, he was offered the position many times, but he stuck to his business. He had a business. He sold cooking oil. And he stayed focused on that. Many of his students, peers, admirers, fans, they would advise him that his business would be his demise because it took up too much of his time. And he felt the same way. But when you are working for a living and to feed your family, work almost becomes a necessity, not even a hobby, even if you started out liking it. And that was his situation. Until one day, he had one of his biggest orders, everything that he owned invested in it, in a deal. He packaged all the oil in barrels, put it in like a storage room, like a warehouse. The customers come to pick up their oil. What do they find in it? Rats everywhere, in the barrels, on the barrels. They've broken. These are wooden barrels, obviously. They don't have plastic or metal. I mean, if it was plastic, it might not even have survived an attack from rats. It was infested. The deal was off the table, and he lost all of his money and everything that he put into it. Relate to these ulama, because the hardships that we go through, they went through. You're not living something new. Sure, there might be some differences, but they're minor when you actually read through the history. Imam al-Zuhri, he gave in, and he answered the requests that kept on coming for him to pick up the job. His peers, some of his peers were not even happy. As a matter of fact, Abdullah ibn Mubarak sent him a letter and said, "You're working now for the government?" And at the end of the letter, he wrote, "ذَلَّ حِمَارِ الْعِلْمِ فِي الطِّينِ." The donkey of knowledge has now slipped and fallen into the mud. I mean, it's not haram. It's just that the scholars did not like to be controlled. Why? Because in fiqh, my brothers and sisters, you have to give the hard answers that people do not want to hear. The people want to hear the good answers, the easy answers, the politically correct answers. People love their movies and their TV shows. They don't want to hear a fatwa saying, well, this might be haram due to lying. This might be haram due to music. This might be haram due to the storyline. This might be haram because people are half naked in it, and the list goes on. I mean, if we were to take anything, even a documentary, there's actually a whole list of issues that even if we were going to be completely neutral and just look at it from a evidence standpoint, we're going to run into a lot of issues, even on basics. I mean, say if one of the experts that they bring in a documentary is a woman who is dressed professionally, but her hair is uncovered, because that's professionally in the West, right? And say, her looks are evident, are strong. Just on that basis alone, there's going to be a fiqh discussion and argument, right? And that's what the faqih does. That's why the faqih, even from the beginning, there was always arguments and discussions. Because a faqih is not looking for emotions. They don't care what the people say. They don't care what the government has to say. That's why we see even the greatest of fuqaha are challenged. But we don't like to be employed by anyone. That's what a faqih truly is. Because the faqih is going to give the answer that no one wants to hear. And the end of the age of the Sahaba and the beginning of the age of the Tabi'een was no different. Sayyidina Muawiyah, he established a system heavily reliant on ar-ra'i, by following in what he presumed as the method of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And he is a major Sahabi. I know a lot of people have issues with Sayyidina Muawiyah, but you have to remember, he is one of the scribes of the Quran. He is related to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When his brother died, Umar assigned him to be the governor over the entirety of Sham. Go look on a map. How big is Sham? Umar is not joking around. This responsibility is major. And while, yes, he's nicknamed by many as the first king in Islam, he is, without a doubt, the best king in Islam. You might differ with him on some of his opinions. Some will have issues with the Umayyad dynasty, but then you get to Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, and everyone, without a doubt, see him as actually the fifth of the Khulafa. Now, there's a reason why. It's that he did not object to the fuqaha and what they said. Now, you keep on hearing me say fuqaha. I'm not mentioning muhaddithin. I'm not mentioning qurra. What's going on with this? Remember the athar of Ibn Mas'ud, that today we have a lot of qurra. Kalam Jameel. Afwan, we have a small amount of qurra, but a larger amount of fuqaha. He meant that the qurra themselves are fuqaha. But in the end times, you'll have many qurra and no fuqaha. Because again, the faqih is the one that gives the hard news. A big amount or quantity of scholars of hadith were fuqaha. Not all of them, obviously not. But a large majority of them were. And Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he brought back that listening to the scholars. So finally with him, you can see the scholars, after years of turmoil, able to answer the Khawarij and their different denominations, the Shia and their different denominations. In this time is when you see the rise and return of the ulama to the scene, where they can actually speak on these matters. In Mecca, we see scholars coming to the scene, scholars upholding the rules, whether it's Mujahid, whether it's Ata, whether it's Tawus, and many others. In Medina, we see ilm returning. We see the efforts of Abdullah ibn Umar clear and spread wide amongst those like Sa'id ibn al-Musayyab and Urwa ibn al-Zubayr and Muhammad al-Zuhri, Muhammad ibn Shahab al-Zuhri, and many others. In al-Kufa, we see al-Nakha'i and Alqama and Masruq and Shurayh and al-Sha'bi. In al-Basra, where Anas ibn Malik was, we see Muhammad ibn Sirin, Abu al-Hasan al-Basri. In al-Sham, al-Sham had many ulama. And who is not familiar with Al-Imam Al-Awza'i or Abu Idris Al-Khawlani or Makhul or Raja ibn Haywa or many others. And in Egypt, the ilm remains there, not as strong as others, but it remains. And from there, we have a major scholar like Al-Layth ibn Sa'd. From these schools, from these efforts, from these scholars, we see the likes of the four fuqaha come to the scene. But before we start speaking about them, we need to understand some of the political aspects of that time. There were many, many political differences between different factions amongst the ummah. As I mentioned earlier, this in turn would eventually cause new ideologies and verdicts to appear. There were many fabricators of hadith and zanadiqa and people that dealt with magic. Kalam Jamil. Now, of course, the khulafa and the umara tried their best to stop this, but it was present nevertheless. There was ta'assub, nationalism, tribalism, cultish behaviors from different groups and ideologies. There were, I spoke a little bit about the origin of some groups and ideologies. Amongst all of that came a group that saw that it was allowed to fabricate a hadith to make the fitan go away. I don't even know how that makes sense. I mean, that logic, how it added up in their minds. If we could go back in time, I would love to hear that logic out, or written out on paper. Because literally all of our Islamic texts tell us that with such behavior comes the fitan. Is this like a fight the fire with the fire type of idea? It's a horrible idea, horrible. And the ulama of these eras, again, as I said, they didn't sit back. They focused on asanid. What is a sanad? What is a chain of transmission? This is from the time of the Sahaba they started this. And it continued. Kalam Jamil, Ibn Mas'ud and Ibn Abbas, they tell us, no one asked about who told you that that's what the Prophet said. But once the fitan started to take place and the bid'ah started to happen, we started to ask the people who are mentioning the Prophet, please tell me who informed you with this information. So that way we can see if it's Ahl Sunnah, we accept. If it's Ahl Bid'ah, we reject. This is the Sahaba speaking. This is Ibn Mas'ud and Ibn Abbas. So those that come and say, oh, you don't know what happened. No, we know what happened because we've kept an eye on it since their time. They'll come and say, well, here's a few ahadith that you can't make up your mind. Is it acceptable or not? That's okay. It's really not because someone fabricated it. That's that which has been fabricated. We know it's fabricated. Jamil. People will mention something like the hadith of Abdullah ibn Khalifa, squeaking of the throne due to what? The weight? Want to continue that sentence with a straight face? We know it's a fabrication. We've known all along that it was a fabrication. And the Salaf had already said Abdullah ibn Khalifa is unknown. They come and say, oh, but he narrated it from Umar. Did he? Or did he narrate directly from the Prophet? Or from Abdullah ibn Umar from the Prophet? Or from Abdullah ibn Umar from the Prophet? Which one was it? You see, even if we knew exactly who the identity of Abdullah ibn Khalifa was, the fact that the chain is narrated in so many different variations is automatically a red flag that we call in the sense of hadith ittirab. Oh, but Imam Ahmad and Abdullah in the Sunnah, it said he accepted it. He said that? Are you sure? Do you want to stick by that opinion? See, this is the problem. As I mentioned yesterday, people speak a lot, but actually when you investigate every detail that's being presented, can't find it. It's not actually there. That's why I love, if someone makes a claim in fiqh, you know what we're told to do? Pause the discussion and let's investigate the claim. Where'd you get it from? Let's go back to the source and read it. Can I make a mistake? Sure. Definitely. Let's go back and read. Let's double check. Let's open up the manuscript of a Sunnah by Abdullah ibn Ahmad, right? And let's double check that title that says Ahmad accepted, or he considered the hadith of Julus to be authentic. Let's take a look at the manuscript real quick. I mean, I can open it right now. If you follow me on Twitter, you've seen already the discussion. The manuscript says, and Ahmad was asked about the hadith of seeing Allah, and he said it was sahih. The editors today, what did they do? And Ahmad was asked about the hadith of Julus, and he said they were sahih. So you want to check again the information? Because that's what we do in fiqh. That's what we do in the science of hadith. That's what we do in every science. But since our topic is fiqh, I'm connecting it back to that. In fiqh, we go back and we take a look. Let's see the details. And that's how the Sahaba were from the beginning. Az-Zuhri said, Al-Isnadu min ad-din, walawla al-Isnad, laqala fihi man sha'a bima sha'a. Ibn al-Mubarak, baynana wa baynahum al-Isnad. Shu'bah, in one of the most famous stories, he sees a chain. The chain does not add up. He feels something is off. He asks the person that tells him, where'd you get it from? I got it from someone from this such and such city. It's a month away. Shu'bah packs his bags and goes. He says, oh, I heard it from someone in another city, another month. He travels and he goes. They tell him, I heard it from the same city that he originated from. He went back, looked for the man, found out it was a fabrication. Our scholars were heavy on this, and they tested narrators. They knew narrators and what the narrators knew. And from this concern and focus came the science of hadith and jarh and ta'dil, that we technically view that Shafi'i, he put down the groundwork in his book Ar-Risala, and we'll get to that inshallah ta'ala shortly. We can also see that the scholars started to focus on how we understand scripture, whether it's the Quran or it's the Sunnah. And we see the methods of the Sahaba developing into actual formal systems. In Iraq, we see the scholars extracting and building upon the method of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, meaning the system of al-Ra'i. And we see Abdullah ibn Mas'ud implementing this system correctly. As a matter of fact, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is noted for saying that I think a ninth of this science, meaning fiqh, goes back to Umar. Not only that, many historians of the ulama believe that Ibn Mas'ud was upon the madhab of Umar in everything he did. As a matter of fact, Al-Imam al-Sha'bi tells us that Ibn Mas'ud did not do qunut in al-subh. But if Umar did, he would. Yani if Umar were to say, this is a thing, he would have done it, according to al-Sha'bi. The system that Umar utilized, even though it's not written, it's present in the minds of the Sahaba, or at least those who looked at it as a methodology to follow. Then we have after Ibn Mas'ud, Ibrahim al-Nakhai, who literally said it. I follow Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. And the opinions held by Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, we see them in Nakhai's statements and words. This was very important for the people of Iraq, because this was a point where the Persian and the Arabian cultures mixed. Meaning that due to this continuous exposure between these nations, fiqh issues needed to be updated and discussed on a regular basis. If you're utilizing a method of, if it's mentioned in the hadith only, you're not going to get far with the people. As a matter of fact, you're going to have more problems than actually solving the problems. Not only this, in Iraq, we had the Shia and the Khawarij. So you had not only two global cultures being exposed to one another, colliding in a sense. Not only that, but you also had major groups of innovation with many of their denominations in the same country. You had to be on your toes. This is why Abu Hanifa became so famous. The majority believe that he's not even of Arab origin, which would make sense in such environment. Because if you're too much Arab, the Persians don't listen. And if you're too much Persian, the Arabs don't listen. Kalam Jameel. So this was a very fluid, needed environment. You had to be flexible. And you needed to know how to roll with the punches, examine things quickly, to settle disputes and problems between people. And that's exactly what Abu Hanifa was able to do. This is what made him a great imam. And before I move on, note that 99% of that which is said against the great imam Abu Hanifa, al-Imam al-A'zam, is due to the clashes between Ahlul Ra'i and Ahlul Hadith. In reality, they have no substance whatsoever. Okay, nothing. Now, what's great about Ahlul Ra'i is that Ahlul Ra'i, they speak upon many details with ease. This methodology, this ability, this fluidity, if you may, is not found amongst Ahlul Hadith. And bear in mind, when I say Ahlul Hadith, I am not speaking about Ahlul Hadith in the general sense, as in specialists of Hadith. No. As a matter of fact, it was more of a Hijazi / Imam Malik's tradition of that time. And we'll get to them in a moment. I also sometimes will refer to them as the pre-Imam Shafi'i Ahlul Hadith. Because after Imam Shafi'i, they change. Because all the advice that Imam Malik had been giving them finally kicked in when Imam Shafi'i came along. Because he told them, there's more to the ahadith than just the ahadith. But the majority didn't listen. Because by sticking to the ahadith alone, then you could argue against al-Ra'i and Ahl al-Ra'i. There was one time a debate between some of the fuqaha. So one of the students sitting there said, however, if we look at it in another view, so the scholar, he was from Ahl al-Hadith, he said, are you from Iraq? Why are you giving me all these additional possibilities and details? Because the main theme of Ahl al-Hadith is to stick to what was said literally. Now, there were some that went beyond that a little bit, but for the most part, they were very literal in a sense. They wouldn't go beyond the text. Even though Imam Malik himself said several times there's more to it, but many did not adhere to that because they found it easier to debate against Ahl al-Ra'y that way. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, this is kind of saying that Ahl al-Hadith is wrong. No, they followed other Sahaba's methodology. And I'm not speaking down or against any of the ulama. No. Keep in mind, these are different systems that we as Shafi'is believe was corrected, in our view, with Imam al-Shafi'i's approach. Why? We'll get to that when we speak about the Shafi'i school. Tamam. Now, the problem that they faced is they didn't put that much effort in hadith as much as Ahlul Hadith, meaning the Hijazi side, did. Kalam Jamil, which again was a good argument against them if you were a muhaddith or you were a person that is connected more to the system provided by the Hijazi school of fiqh, which is Ahlul Hadith. Now let's look at Ahlul Hadith. What's unique about Ahlul Hadith? First of all, where they are, Hijaz. That's where the Sharia came, right? So you're already seeing a lot of people that their habits and traditions, their actual culture is shaped by the Sharia itself. Okay. In many of these towns and communities and villages, if you could argue that the people have not changed in how they behave, you had a comfort in your heart that these people might be closest to how the Prophet ﷺ was. And this is surely what Imam Malik felt in Medina. 600 teachers, all of which are residents of Medina, who took from the scholars of Medina. Surely if they don't do something, then it can't be from the deen, because, come on, this is the city of the Prophet. It's a very decent argument, right? Who was the leading scholar in Medina after the Sahaba? Well, first we need to see who were the leading scholars of the Sahaba. Two main ones, Zayd ibn Thabit and Abdullah ibn Umar. Now, Abdullah ibn Umar was different than his father. A lot of people usually associate them with one another in their methodology. They weren't. As a matter of fact, Ibn Umar was so hadith-centric, if you may, to the point, if he had seen the Prophet ﷺ dress in a certain way and walk a certain alley on a certain day of the week at a certain time, he does it. We already know him as a teenager. He was caught numerous times practically spying on the Prophet ﷺ. Not in a negative way, but just to do like him. To the point where some have even narrated that he watched the Prophet ﷺ go to the bathroom. When they asked him, what are you doing? He said, I want to go to the bathroom like the Prophet ﷺ goes to the bathroom. I might say, okay, well, this is an extreme. And don't forget, you're speaking about a teenager at the time. Okay, so it'll happen from a teenager, right? That's what you expect. From this school, from this methodology of what did the Prophet ﷺ do, I'm going to do. How the Prophet ﷺ dressed, I'm going to dress. A culture was established in Medina. And we see major scholars such as Sa'id ibn Musayyib. Sa'id, he was the head of Ahl al-Madinah, and he could actually be labeled as the forefather of the Hijazi tradition. Tamam? But he's not the only one. We have Nafi', the Mawla of Ibn Umar, Salim, the son of Abdullah ibn Umar. Kalam Jamil. From Salim, as a matter of fact, there's a famous incident. Someone asked him about something. Listen carefully, because you'll hear the resemblance of the rest of the scholars who we know as Ahl al-Hadith. A man asks him about something. Salim literally responds and says, I have not heard a hadith that connects back to this issue. The man said, oh, ya Shaykh, أصلحك الله وإياي ما هو رأيك? What's your opinion? So Salim said, لا 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 لا. No, 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 no. Basically, don't even go there. You see this approach? Because we know this approach. We've seen it from Imam Malik, right? We know it's a system presented and heavily influenced in the Hanbali tradition. We see the Hijazi and Ahlul Hadith scholars, even who are not in Hijaz, uphold this opinion firmly. If there's a hadith, say it. If there isn't, I don't know. Look at Salim, the son of Abdullah ibn Umar. You see what he's doing? Okay, he says no. So the man says, I'll take your opinion. I just need an answer. Salim says, if I give you an opinion and then you leave me, and then I change my opinion and I don't find you, what do I do at that point? I just gave you an answer that I no longer deem as valid. I'm not giving you an answer. This is the same exact approach found throughout the scholars of Madrasat Ahlul Hadith. Kalam Jamil. Not only that, Ash-Sha'bi, who's from a Hijazi scholar, what does he say? He says, if they come to you saying, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, accept it. If they come to you and they say, I think we have this opinion, then put it in the hush. Al-hush is what we call today in modern Arabic, we'll refer to just say hush, just means in the playground, outside in the street, away. It's garbage. It's nonsense. It's their opinion. Now, why were they this way? Because their culture is built upon what the Prophet ﷺ said and did. Generations living in that way, therefore heavily influenced by such thinking. There's no need for opinions. There's no need for qiyas. As a matter of fact, there's no need for any of that unless it's something excessively major. Maybe the scholars will get together to discuss it and come up with an opinion. But beyond that, there's just no need. Their culture overall hadn't really changed. They didn't really have any exposure to entire other civilizations, maybe an individual here or there, but an actual civilization collision? No, not like what was happening in Iraq. So there was no need really to advance the system beyond that. In addition, there were so many scholars saying the same thing. There was just no need. When fitan broke out in the Muslim world, after Muawiyah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, they didn't come to Hijaz much. It was maybe in Asham, maybe a little bit of issues here and there in Egypt, mostly in Iraq. After that, it starts getting further and deeper into Persia. Yani, you know, even if we were to مثلا take North Africa, for example, and try to calculate how many fitan, battles, fighting actually broke out, really it's a handful. In comparison with Iraq, we really could write endless books on it. I mean, like the Prophet ﷺ said, what? Ardul fitan, right? So there was no need. There was no need. Their answers were simple. They did not allow excessive analyzing of masail. This was not allowed. There's no hypotheticals. Hypotheticals was something looked at as, why would you ever speak about something like that? If the Sharia didn't mention something, I have no need for a hypothetical. so many athar about things that might have changed over time, already discussed. There's no need for you to advance anything. Kalam Jameel. Now, right before we get to the Imam Shafi'i appearing on the scene, a few things we need to know. Before Imam Malik, we have the great 7 scholars of Medina. Sa'id, we mentioned him already. Urwa ibn Zubair, Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad, Kharija ibn Zayd, Abu Bakr ibn Abdul Rahman, ibn Harith ibn Hisham, Sulaiman ibn Yasar, and Ubaydillah ibn Abdullah ibn Utbah ibn Mas'ud. These 7 scholars are looked at as the forefathers of the Hijazi tradition. They played the major role in the development of that type of approach and understanding. Okay. After them, and after the dominance and the great success of Ahlul Ra'i in Iraq, they're starting to document things, systems amongst Ahlul Iraq. There was great intellectual battles and arguments between these two sides. Many issues happened. Many arguments. I mentioned like Ibn al-Musayyib, he said something. Someone said, well, we could look at it another way. He said, are you from Iraq? And there was this odd understanding that it's from Iraq, it must be bad, that started to develop amongst a lot of Hijazis. Now, this was not dominant amongst the scholars, but it was present. Meaning people were being belittled with such understandings. Also, when fitan broke out in Iraq during the time of the younger generations of the Sahaba, like Abdullah ibn Umar, the people of Iraq, instead of going to the Sahaba that are there present, they do the craziest thing, almost like we see many youth doing today. They travel all the way to Medina and ask Abdullah ibn Umar. Now, there's nothing technically wrong with that, but there's Sahaba there you could have asked that are aware of the situation. Taking a fatwa from Hijaz and bringing it to Iraq, where the system that is currently in the process of development causes friction and problems. Like we see today, youth will go to some random individual that they label as a scholar. Half the time they're not really scholars, right? We'll get an odd fatwa that makes no sense for the environment that's being asked for. They take it back home and people are like, what? Like, what planet did that come from? And then if the people are on the fence of accepting it, they start deeming them heretics and innovators. It's like, well, wait a minute. Who said that that individual is even a scholar? Better yet, who says that he's actually qualified to answer my culture issue, my current affair? You see, because that's a problem. And it was not being addressed. Tamam. Meaning the feuds happened. Now, these feuds would appear in very common masail. For example, Ahlul Hijaz scholars viewed that the follower in Jama'ah needs to recite Quran. The majority of Ahlul Ra', they said what? They said no. Not in Dhuhr or Asr. And in Maghrib and Isha, do they? They said never. While the scholars of Hijaz said yes. So imagine if you're a merchant or a family going for Hajj and going to pray, and you're not reciting, and someone is aware of the khilaf, which it was very popular back then, and sees you, you think that the problems of putting the hands where you're putting them on the chest is an issue? Or if you're putting them all together, you haven't read the history of what used to happen. This was a serious problem. How you sit. Al-Hijaz said tawarruk. Kalam Jamil. Some of Ahl al-Ra'yi said, no, that's not how you sit. You bend your toes, keep your feet next to each other, and you sit on the heels. Kalam Jamil. So if you're praying and they see you either side, there's going to be a problem. There was no internet to distract the youth. Everyone was involved. And there's many, many other issues. But that's not the point of why we're gathering. Now, as a bystander, a spectator even, to what is taking place, you need to think of a way to solve the problem. How do we solve the problem? Now, one might argue to a certain extent that Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik both were participating in solving these problems to the best of their ability, but utilizing the systems that they adhered to. We in the Shafi'i school view that the problem was not solved until Imam Shafi'i came to the scene. This is not for a defect that we see in anyone else. He had more time and was able to gather a few extra things to solve the problem. Jameel, there's nothing special about him. He's a scholar like all of the others. We don't elevate him beyond his status. He is simply one of the founders of one of the 4 Sunni schools in Islam. And what he does changes the entire Islamic world, because after him, there's really no such thing as Ahlul Ra'y and Ahlul Hadith. Now someone might come say, well, what about what Ibn Abi Hatim said? He's after Shafi'i, right? That's true. Remember when I told you that 99% what's said about Imam Abu Hanifa is due to all those feuds? The 1% is remnants of those feuds. Kalam Jamil. And once we speak about the creed of Imam al-Shafi'i and we compare some of the narrations together, bi'idhnillah, you'll see why. You'll see what was happening. A deliberate, nothing evil or anything, but a deliberate attempt to revive that ancient debate. It's normal. It's part of the culture, right? It's not going to go away easy. I mean, if you remember back when you were a child, there was probably this 1 or 2 cartoons that meant the world to you. Comic books, maybe. Novels, if you were a good reader when you were a kid. They're still in your mind. You would love to see them maybe made into a movie or a new comic book. You might not say it out loud because, well, you're a student of knowledge now. You're not going to be participating in that. But you would find it amusing if it were, right? Be interested maybe taking a peek. Even though you might be a student of knowledge. We're human. That's what humans do. Coming from a family of ulama, hearing about the glory days of Ahl al-Hadith, it'll make sense for Ibn Abi Hatim to continue quoting certain statements, or Abdullah ibn Ahmad quoting certain statements. Makes perfect sense. It doesn't mean that they're valid. Okay? And there's many reasons for why it wouldn't be, but that's beyond the scope of our sessions here. Now, before we begin the history of the Shafi'i school, note that there are many, many works that have been written on this topic. Different perspectives, different analysis being presented. I think, my personal opinion, the best person to write in this field is a Shafi'i scholar known as Sayyid Muhammad bin Umar al-Kaf. He has a book. It has not been published yet. It should be published in the next month or two, according to what he told me last week. Okay. And the book is a complete analysis to everything that has been documented and everything that has been claimed. The Sheikh had shared his book online with several different people to the point that many groups actually already had it. And the book's title is Al-Mu'tamad. I've read the book several times. I've taught the book a few times. And the majority of analysis and historical data relating to the Shafi'i school that I will be presenting will be relying heavily on his work from the historical aspect. Because if you're looking into this field, you'll have set titles, but you also have a lot of fabricated manuscripts. Like there's a famous manuscript called Ar-Rihla that's supposed to be literally written by Shafi'i himself. That's a fabrication. Similarly, are books known as I'tiqad al-Shafi'i, the Creed of al-Shafi'i, fabrications. And there's many, many things like this. A lot of times analysis is made with these things in mind. A lot of people ask me, what do I think about the book of Imam al-Razi in regards to Manaqib Imam al-Shafi'i? Overall, it's decent, but he relied on a couple fabricated manuscripts and quoted a couple stories that we know where they came from. Your best biography of Imam al-Shafi'i is actually Manaqib Imam al-Shafi'i by Imam al-Bayhaqi. Full chains, full stories, full incidents, everything. Not half-catched phrases or half glimpses into things that took place. No, it's the entirety of the stories that are being attributed to Imam al-Shafi'i, with complete chains, multiple chains at times. It's one of your best resources. Now, the way that Sheikh Muhammad breaks down the Shafi'i school, he breaks it down into 8 different time periods. The first time period is the beginning or the establishment of the Shafi'i school via Imam al-Shafi'i himself teaching and writing and discussing and debating. That's your first stage. And for your notes, this takes place between 186 Hijri to his death in 204. The next stage is the transmission of the school. There wasn't a lot of fiqh that took place, meaning new ideas. However, with that being said, people like Imam al-Muzani did indeed begin a trend of extraction or even differing with Imam al-Shafi'i. A lot of times he won't even actually continue the discussion. He'll just mention objection and keep on going. Take, for example, we know if a woman is in her menses, a Muslim woman, she should not be in the masjid. This is the mu'tamad of the school. Imam al-Shafi'i himself stated, all the Shafi'is agree, no differences. However, Imam al-Muzani, in the chapter of al-Qada, legal issues, legal procedures and whatnot, Imam al-Shafi'i said if a non-Muslim woman is coming to the judge for a dispute or an issue, she's non-Muslim, and the judge so happens to be set up to be in the masjid, which he shouldn't be. Even in the school we say the judge should be somewhere else, not in the masjid, because usually in disputes people raise their voices. Could be disrespectful to the masjid, but we'll just say hypothetically he's there in the masjid, and this woman who's a non-Muslim is in her menses. She can come into the masjid. Imam Muzani said, wait a minute, so we just left the chapter of Tahara in the beginning of the book saying that our sister can't come into the masjid, but now we're saying that a woman who's not considered our sister is allowed into the masjid? How so? He pauses there and he keeps on going on as if his objection was not just stated in the book. It's merely an objection. Some people will come mistakenly and say, well, this is an opinion. No, it's just an objection without any substance. Why do we do that? What's the point? Now, the Shafi'i scholars did answer the objection, and they said, well, the Muslim sister views that the masjid is a holy environment, and she, by her being a Muslimah, has the responsibility to keep its sacredness in place. Now, this non-Muslimah living in Muslim lands, seeking her right in a dispute from a Muslim judge, we might need to show a bit of hospitality because she's a stranger. She doesn't uphold the same views as us to the masjid, so that's not on her mind, and we have an obligation, which is to handle and solve her dispute. That's the angle in which we looked at it, and that's why we said what we said. This stage begins with the death of Imam Shafi'i, because the students step up to the mission, to the task, Jazahumullah khair jazai wal ihsan, until the last one's death in 270, and that's Al-Rabi' al-Muradi. In the third stage, what we have is the true appearance and presence of the Shafi'i school in Muslim neighborhoods and towns and cities across Muslim lands. This is from 270 and ends in 404. But why 404? As the school was spreading through the lands, guess what? We ran into the same issues that the Hanafis ran into. Too many new problems. And then we realized something odd in the books of our fellow Shafi'i scholars. The ones further east had a lot more details to discuss. The ones further west had a lot less details to discuss. Sound familiar? Same exact issue from before, right? So when we look at the books that are coming from Khurasan, they're gigantic. So much detail. Look at some of their students, the students of the Khurasani scholars. Take Imam al-Haramain, Nihayatul Matlab, 20-something volumes. It's not a joke. His student, Imam al-Ghazali, I don't know how we can actually really call his books a summarization or an abridgment of his teacher's books. They're as large and sometimes even more complex. It's the Khurasani way. Now let's come over to the Iraqi way. This is what we call them. We call them Khurasani versus Iraqi. Sometimes we say the Marawiza versus the Iraqiyin. And bear in mind, for your notes, when we say Iraqiyin, that's a blanket statement. When we say Khurasaniyin, that's a blanket statement. You don't necessarily need to be in any of these regions to be labeled as one of them. You just need to be alive during this time frame. In Iraq, there are sub-schools. In Khurasan, there were no sub-schools. What do we mean? We mean Iraqis actually had a Baghdadi branch and a Basri branch. And we can look at some of the books of the scholars from there. People like Al-Mawardi, Al-Hawi. Al-Hawi hawa يعني كل شيء. MashaAllah. Huge works. But not as detailed and expanding as the Khurasani works. We see, simpler books by looking at people like Ash-Shirazi, who is technically an Iraqi graduate, and we look at his books, Al-Muhadhab, At-Tanbih, and that should signify something to you. While Imam al-Haramain is writing Nihayat al-Matlab, Al-Imam Abu Ishaq al-Shirazi is writing Al-Muhadhab. Same masail, but look at the difference. Now you might say, well, this is a matn, and that's a sharh. Yes, but compare even what Imam al-Haramain did to what Imam al-Mawardi did, and there's just no comparison. Al-Hawi is tiny in comparison to An-Nihaya. If you look at the Basris of the Iraqis, they were even shorter and smaller and less text, like a Saymari and his efforts. Some say that his books were so small, you wouldn't even be able to see that there's actually anything that was actually written. But that was what we find present amongst our Iraqi fellow Shafi'i scholars. If we look at Ibn al-Qas, Ibn al-Haddad, Qaffal, Ibn Faris, al-Halimi, we can see a separation, a division in the methodologies being used by these scholars. But we stopped at 404. Why? The expansion started to end towards year 350. What expansion? Well, with Ibn Surayj, and in particular Ibn Surayj, began a new system. Instead of me trying to figure out what would the verdict be on a mas'ala, instead I'll go back to Imam Shafi'i's works and I'll find something similar and I'll just apply it to that which is similar. This began with Ibn Surayj. He might be the first one to start do takhrij. And this is what we call it. We call it takhrij. And don't worry, we're going to be speaking about each one of these phases in depth and detail. Right now, this is just the outlook of these stages, so we can understand why they exist. So takhrij is, I have a mas'ala, and in this mas'ala, I have nothing from the Quran, Sunnah. I'm either going to have to make up my mind, or I need to find a way to connect it to Imam Shafi'i himself. Now, there's two ways that you could do this. The first way is to go back to the usul of Imam Shafi'i, which we'll speak about shortly, inshallah ta'ala, and build the case on those usul, but that takes forever. That takes a lot of that will take years to do properly, because you need to match things up accordingly, make sure there's no exceptions to the rules, etc. It's a lot of work. It's easier said than done. There's a reason why the four schools believe that there has yet been four imams like the four imams. The reason is that the process is very heavy. Of course, we'll see kids right now online, they'll mention a hadith and be like, oh, there you go, there's your answer. I handled it for you. But if we were to analyze what they just did, it's actually nothing. They think it is something, but it isn't. And we'll speak why. We'll get to that, inshallah ta'ala. So Ibn Surayj, what he does or begins to do, and again, some even consider Ibn Surayj the forefather of this concept, but there's debates there, is that he goes and he finds a similar issue in the works of Imam Shafi'i. So therefore, he'll apply the same verdict that Imam Shafi'i applied. Now, we are uncertain if Ibn Surayj answered objections to this method, because many objections came to this. Like, what if we find another similar mas'ala, but the hukm is different? What do you do then? That's a problem. We don't know if he actually answered this type of objection. Now, we know that Ibn Surayj wrote over 400 books. Sadly, we don't have them. The scholars that came after him, they took this system and they accepted it. But you had to be a major, major scholar, someone who's extremely well-versed in Imam Shafi'i's fiqh books and usul books, and understands and knows how to read the level of Arabic of Imam Shafi'i. If you speak Arabic well, open up Imam Shafi'i's Al and read a sentence. If that's how you speak, I want to meet you in person someday. If that's not how you speak, then you understand exactly what I mean. And we'll be reading a couple segments from Al inshallah ta'ala during these sessions as well. So we have one group of scholars that went heavily into the concept and viewed that this opens up the door for a lot of issues. We actually have one of them saying literally verbatim, because of this, the school now will have the ability and capacity to answer every issue that will ever impact humans until the end of time, because you can always build on that. Another group of scholars said, we do this at a very bare minimum. If we really need to. Do you go back to usul? No, we don't do any form of takhrij, because we can't guarantee, since a lot of these takhrij, scholars have argued that, well, there's similar issues that Shafii said the exact opposite. I can't guarantee that this would work. I can't guarantee that. I don't know if a Shafii would agree to that same verdict. I can't even actually say with full confidence that my mas'ala looks like that mas'ala. So I can't go that route unless I see an extreme need to do so. Now, around 350 Hijri, what happens is that this system, this mechanism, starts to die out. What do I mean by die out? Meaning that we don't see people having the capacity to continue down this route. Therefore, we're ending this phase. By ending this phase, the idea of takhrij has ended. That's it. No one can do takhrij anymore. If you want to do something, you can be part of the two schools. What do we mean? We mean that you can develop awjuh. Now, many said no, because the concept of awjuh, meaning opinions based upon what we perceive as the usul of Imam Shafi'i, that should end with takhrij. So the majority said, Ashabul awjuh, the people of awjuh, they ended with the people of takhrij in 404. Now this opinion is going to be challenged in a moment. As that was dying off, the process of takhrij, the process of awjuh, we had an effort to consolidate all the previous efforts. This is where both the Khurasani and the Iraqi systems appear to the Shafi'is, because according to the majority of our historians, during those times, no one realized what was happening. So before 404, they didn't realize that the systems were different. Again, it's not like they had WhatsApp, or a Telegram group to communicate their assessments and analysis, right? So in 404 to 505, we come to this realization that, FYI, we have different systems in place, and we need to end them. to unify the effort so we don't wind up dividing the school into many minor little schools. And this system begins, and we start to see it in books like Al-Ghazali, like in Imam al-Haramain, like in Ash-Shirazi. There is an underlying attempt to do this, even though they consider, or they title our fellow Shafi'i scholar Abu Ali as-Sinji rahimahullah ta'ala wa radiyallahu ta'ala anhu as being the first one to point out the existence of the two methods and the first one to attempt a unification. But the full picture doesn't really hit it like it should. And around this time, the Fatimites are being conquered. The Crusaders are having their heads served to them. The mighty soldiers of Islam, the spirit of the Muslims of Ahl Sunnah, wake up again. As you can tell, Ahl Sunnah sometimes take naps, and their return is being felt again these days. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us with a Salah ad-Din. But this is a problem now. Salah ad-Din is Shafi'i. Most of those who are fighting are Shafi'i. If they ask us, which they did, for a book, we don't have a unified book. We can't even establish curriculum-based schools yet because we don't have a unified system. We needed someone to handle this task. And it needs to be done correctly. And then a great imam starts to handle this effort, known as Al-Rafi'i, and begins the fifth stage, the stage of editing, unifying and editing, reviewing the adillah, crossing out weak adillah, pushing aside weak discussions and arguments. Imam al-Rafi'i writes a huge work called Al-Aziz Sharh al-Wajiz. Some people find an issue calling it Al-Aziz. They say it's from Asma'illah. Yes, but it can be used for other things because it has multiple meanings. If we open up the books of science of hadith, there's a type of hadith called Al-Aziz. No one ever questioned that. They said, oh, but it's a hadith. Yeah, but we're not calling it because it's a hadith. We're calling it because it has support, it had backup, or it's a unique situation. There's a difference between scholars of hadith why they called it Aziz. Nevertheless, Imam al-Rafi'i did something that no one else had done before. He reviewed the majority of the works of the people before him, and he put together a masterpiece. Not only that, some people wanted to shorten it, make it easier. He said, no, I'll handle it. I'll do it myself so the message can get through correctly. So we had Al-Kabir and Al-Saghir, Sharh Al-Kabir and Sharh Al-Saghir. And when he was done, he wrote Al-Muharrar, basically concluding all of those efforts and years of studying into a small little book to be memorized. It was amazing work. The Shafi'is had seen nothing like it. The issues that we might find in At-Tanbih by Shirazi are solved by the books of Rafi'i, because he got the Khurasanis, he got the Iraqis. Yes, there's an underlying tone of Khurasanis because he's a graduate of the Khurasanis, but it doesn't matter because overall, he's mentioned everyone. It's perfect. But there's a few problems. He used a lot of non-fiqh lingo due to the society that he lived in. He sometimes uses a lot of non-Arabic words in the middle of his text. Again, it could be go back to the culture issue. And he didn't really follow a uniform system of presentation. So he might say qawl. When we say qawl, we mean Imam al-Shafi'i's statements. And he actually means another Shafi'i scholar. he might say al-Azhar, and he means a Shafi'i scholar, even though overall there was an unspoken, unwritten agreement that Azhar was something we used with the Shafi'i. It wasn't spoken. We didn't agree on it. We didn't write it down, but it was overall, it was there. It was present. You can actually see it in previous books. But he didn't stick to any system, which when he shortened any discussion or argument that he was presenting, kind of threw you off a little bit. These were minor issues, right? Minor issues. I mean, realistically, they don't even really matter. If you're a student and you're studying something that heavy, these kind of things are, it's not even a big deal. Okay? It's not. But if we could just perfect them, wow. We could wow the world. This is when Imam al-Nawawi comes to the scene. A person who has studied al-Tanbih, al-Muhadhab, al-Wasit by al-Ghazali. Do you see that? That's Khurasani and Iraqi influences, right? Mastered Arabic, mastered Hadith, mastered Quran, mastered many other different things. He studied usul, he studied logic, he studied ilm al-kalam, he studied it all. He sharpens his pencils and says, you know something, I'm going to fix this problem. Which we'll see, inshallah, in our next session when we read the introduction of Al-Minhaj and the Rawda, inshallah ta'ala. Which he will actually touch base on the issues and the reasons why he saw the need to do this. And he put together masterpieces. Yes, a lot of it is editing of others' work. Yes, like Al-Minhaj and Rawda. But you really can't compare. You really can't. And by what Imam al-Nawawi did, and mostly he summarized Rafi'i's efforts, meaning even though al-Nawawi corrected al-Rafi'i's work, you couldn't go without al-Rafi'i. Basically, it's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, yes, Nawawi, I want you to make al-Rafi'i's books better, but I'm not going to allow anyone to forget al-Rafi'i and what he did for the Shafi'is. So Nawawi's work is mostly ikhtisar, it's abridgments, it's summarizations, it's a rewriting of certain sentences and phrases. But even Nawawi says, and I'm not, even if Rafi said something wrong, I'm going to keep it and I'm going to comment on it. So you need them both. And this is truly the age, the stage of Rafi and Nawawi. Now, when you have a grand scholar that's presenting something, you need someone to question them. Even if there are only two scholars, you need someone to check their work and review their work. Peer review, if you may. Because if you don't, what's going to happen is that you will eventually fall victim to one of those scholars, because that's a form of oppression. Remember what we said. In fiqh schools, we don't follow individuals. We follow complete bodies of ulama. That's what fiqh is. That's what tamadhub is. That's what it's all about. It's pushing aside individuals and their opinions and their ideas. I don't care about an individual idea. An individual's idea, and that individual is a Muslim, well, technically, if I've studied, there's no difference between me and him. Then how do you correct the problem? By taking the ulama as a whole. These schools have, and it's not even an exaggeration, probably millions of scholars reviewing one another. No one's actually sat down to count, but if we were to think about it, millions, easily. So we had scholars that came after that fifth stage. So the fifth stage ends in 676 with Imam al-Nawawi's death. It's beautiful about these scholars. Imam al-Nawawi told his student Ibn al-Attar, go and erase everything I wrote in a rawdah. I don't like it anymore. I just don't feel like it's 100%. He said, I can't. He said, why? He said, because literally it's everywhere in the world now. So many copies everywhere. He said, alhamdulillah. Al-Imam al-Nawawi was so unsatisfied with his work that Ibn al-Attar actually wrote under the book Al-Minhaj, which is a famous text that was being studied during the lifetime of Imam al-Nawawi himself. Ibn al-Attar said, I think this is incomplete. This shows us, wallahi, the piety of the ulama. And it's not about them. But every great scholar needs a critic. This is what happens in the sixth stage, which starts in 676 and ends in 926. So after the death of Imam al-Nawawi, there appears a stage of ulama where yes, Imam al-Nawawi is a great scholar, but we need to double check his work. Scholars like Ibn Rif'ah, Al-Isnawi, Al-Adra'i, Al-Bulqini, and after them, their students like Az-Zarkashi. What did they do? They reviewed everything. Some of them focusing on excessively professional, some while being very professional at times they go a little bit too far and say, I don't know why Rafi'i and Nawawi are saying the word thiyuba about the thayyib, those that have been married. That makes no sense. This is not even Arabic, which is odd since it's in Arabic dictionaries. I don't know what they're talking about, but let's remember Imam Zarkashi, he reads someone's objection to something Imam Nawawi said. He said, realistically, at this point, a Nawawi can now say, and I'll translate in English after I say it, سألته عن أبيه فقال خالي شعيب. He's basically saying now Imam Nawawi has the right now to say to the one objecting, I asked him about his father's name, and he said, my uncle's name is Shu'aib. Basically, I'm asking about something, he's answering something in a completely different area. And we'll learn about why and how that happened, how that could have happened. We'll get to that all, inshallah ta'ala. But we, with this stage, understood the mistakes that were made by Rafi' and Nawawi. They're human after all, right? It's not about them per individual. It's about the school as in its entirety. But also these critics needed critics, and this stage ends with Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari, because people like him, Al-Imam al-Mahalli, were critics of the critics and said, yes, we do recognize that these two scholars did indeed make mistakes. But half of what you're saying as mistakes is actually your misunderstanding. So we're going to keep Rafi' and Nawawi as leaders as they are. We'll take your criticism, that which is correct, under advisement, and we'll point out that, yes, these are mistakes. That which you're wrong in, we'll just ignore or take it as an opportunity to read through how criticism should take place and what is correct criticism. And it is truly, realistically, it is great material for proper criticizing of fiqh understandings and verdicts. It really is. So even if you disagree with those great, grand scholars that we will never be at their level, maybe one of us, inshallah ta'ala, gets somewhere near them, even that we disagree with them, their material is so essential in developing a mind that has the proper capacity for fiqh critique. This is very rare. Usually when people are critiquing one another, it's more of personal jabs. Oh, how dumb are you? Type of approach. That's not how we do it. No, we say, well, let's look at it this way. Well, what are the evidences? How is this structured, etc. And I claim that if you want to understand more of that, you need Al-Imam Muhammad ibn Sulaiman al-Kurdi's books. Muhammad ibn Sulaiman al-Kurdi is actually part of the next stage, the seventh stage, that begins in 926 and ends in 1335. We call this the stage of shuruh and hawashi. Some scholars will differ if they'll place the shuruh with the one above, or take al-Mahalli and Shaykh Islam Zakaria out of the sixth and put the shuruh with them into a seventh and then add another stage. Tomato, really. It's not the end of the world. I like this one better. because Hawashi did not begin after the shuruh, but rather with the shuruh. And I'll explain how. The pioneers of this age are people like Al-Imam Ibn Hajar, Al-Imam Al-Ramli, Al-Khatib Al-Shirbini, Ibn Qasim Al-Abbadi. A lot of people don't know he's from the peers of Ibn Hajar and the Ramli. Al-Imam, the Yemeni scholar Ba Makhrama, who, if he had written more, he could have outranked both Ibn Hajar and the Ramli combined. It's a possibility. We can't actually say that with 100% certainty, but Ba Makhrama was legendary. He truly was. So they start after this stage where we're accepting al-Rafi' al-Nawawi, we're accepting the objections, okay, why we accepted some objections, why we rejected some of them, and then they differed amongst themselves on some of those, in a minor sense, what should be accepted and what should be rejected. They wrote their books. Ibn Hajar actually wrote a hashiyah on his Tuhfa. A lot of people don't know about. Alhamdulillah, I was blessed with a copy of the manuscript. And you read through the manuscript and subhanAllah, there's a couple incidences there where we thought that he meant one thing, it turned out he meant something else. Not a whole lot. But the Hawashi actually begun during the times of these scholars. As a matter of fact, even Al-Khatib al-Shirbini wrote a hashiyah on al-Mughni. Last we've heard of it is that it was passed around mostly between the scholars of Iraq, and the invasion happened and we lost track of half of where things were. That's something to look forward to. But it was mostly in mu'amalat, so in transactions, mostly in business transactions. There wasn't a whole lot that he did on ibadat, because remember, Al-Mughni is not the last book of Al-Khatib al-Shirbini. Al-Iqna' is. And some argue it's not even Al-Iqna', it's his explanation on a Sittin. However, many believe that his work on a Sittin is in between Al-Mughni and Al-Iqna'. Plus, a Sittin is a very, very tiny book, so there's not a whole lot there to it. If you look at the majority of the shuruh of the Sittin, they're like, what, 20 slides to 40 slides? I think I saw maybe 100 slides. These are tiny, tiny little books. And don't worry, I'm going to speak about all of these books, don't worry. Because we're going to get into the details of each one of these stages so we can understand even more about them. This is nothing but an introduction to the 8 stages. Now, these Hawashi and the expansion of efforts on the explanations that were written, explanations like on Minhaj, on Irshad, on Al-Muqaddimah Al-Hadramiyya, and others, because the author of Al-Muqaddimah Al-Hadramiyya, he's actually from the 6th stage. He's technically from the 6th stage, not from the 7th. Kalam Jamil Al-Mukhtasar Al-Saghir, because he died in 918. And if you look at his works, you would assume to a high probability that he based it off of Al-Minhaj while correcting things according to the corrections made by the critics. It's amazing. And the Hawashi continued. And realistically, while many Hawashi were written, a lot of Hawashi were actually just simply the explanation of some of the scholars while teaching the books. They weren't actually written. As a matter of fact, if you actually go to a lot of Hawashi and read the introduction, you'll see that the Sheikh actually never wrote it. Rather, one of his students wrote it, and then one of the students of the students took it and wrote it out. Wrote out the whole thing. As a matter of fact, let me pull up one for you real quick. I think the best one, where you'll see this at, I think it's the Hashiyah of Imera. Okay, Shamila now is playing a number. Here we go. Bismillah. Where'd it go? No, that's Qalyubi I'm reading here. 1 second. Bismillah. Maybe this is not the one. Inshallah, we'll be reading it tomorrow in our next session, bi'idhnillah. But one of the Hawashi, it actually says that this is taken from the notes of Al-Abbadi, of the notes of his sheikh, or from what he heard from his sheikh. So it's a student of Al-Abbadi writing out the notes of Al-Abbadi that were taken when Al-Abbadi was at one of his teachers. That's a lot of where the Hawashi come from. Some Hawashi were written, some were written out in that way. By the time we get to Muhammad ibn Sulaiman al-Kurdi, so you're looking in the early 1200s. Al-Kurdi, his Hawashi are different than all the Hawashi before him. He rewrites the whole concept of Hawashi. Because what he does is that he tells you in depth and detail the errors of those who criticized An-Nawawi and the Rafi'i and the things that they made a mistake in. He's breaking down technically how they made the mistake in a way that if you read it, you'll be like, oh, subhanAllah, he just solved 6 things in my head on the issue. Every time I read something by Imam Muhammad ibn Sulaiman al-Kurdi, I say, subhanAllah, subhanAllah, I overlooked half of this. Subhanallah, I learned something new. Every time you read from Muhammad ibn Sulaiman al-Kurdi, you're going to learn something new. Every single time. Without a fail. As a matter of fact, if you read the same thing twice, the second time you'll learn new things that you didn't understand the first time. Yet some people have us believe that Muhammad ibn Sulaiman al-Kurdi is one of the people that didn't know what La ilaha illallah meant. If you remember what date I gave you, cross-reference that with where he was, Medina, and what was going on around the same time. You'll know what I meant by the comment. But think about that for a moment. A scholar with this magnitude, this caliber, and people are saying he doesn't know. Because remember what was said. FYI, the person that you think that I'm talking about in mind, yes, that is the person. And he studied with Muhammad ibn Sulaiman al-Kurdi. So to come after that and say Muhammad ibn Sulaiman al-Kurdi doesn't know what La ilaha illallah means, I think we need to have a discussion with you on what La ilaha illallah actually means, because you have a problem. My dear brothers, Muhammad ibn Sulaiman al-Kurdi is on a level that if he was alive during the time of Shaykh al-Islam Zakir al-Ansari, he might have had the capacity to be grander, more knowledgeable, and stronger than Shaykh al-Islam Zakir al-Ansari. But such things are a blessing from Allah. And without a doubt, in his century, he is the leading scholar. This is why right afterwards we see a Sharawani, Abdul Hamid al-Sharawani, who's from Dagestan, and Imam al-Kurdi is from Kurdistan. He relies heavily on everything al-Kurdi does. Al-Sharawani becomes mu'tamad because his reliance on al-Kurdi. Because that's how powerful and accurate al-Kurdi was. What I would love to see at some point in the future is a critic to al-Kurdi, so we can benefit more. Just so that way, if there's errors and mistakes, they can stand out. My problem with this is that 90% of al-Kurdi's works are still in manuscripts. So as I try to fit in publishing news and stuff like that in regards to Shafi'i school, our dear brother and Sheikh Mundhir al-Ghazali is working on the majority of it. He had literally he was working on several, I think it was like 5 or 6 manuscripts, different books by Imam al-Kurdi, and he just decided, you know something, we're going to print it all as like the collection of the letters and the articles and the booklets of Imam al-Kurdi. And he's already started on Imam al-Kurdi's Hawashi on Ibn Hajar's explanation of al-Muqaddimah al-Hadramiyyah, which there's 3 Hawashi, a small one, medium one, and a large one. Inshallah, these are going to be powerful. But side secret, please don't tell anyone because he hasn't published it yet. He also just submitted for publication the Hashiyah of Ibn Hajar on al-Tuhfa. So this is, when this gets published, people will be running after this. This is going to be excessively important for anyone that has a Tuhfa. Now we move on to the last stage. Our last point for this evening, inshallah ta'ala, is the 8th stage, which takes us from 1335, the age of al-Bajuri, al-Bujayrami, al-Jamal, Sharawani, to the current era that we live today. Some people call this the age in which the madahib died, or tamadhub as a concept died. We say this is not true. A lot of people also will think that during the Ottoman Empire, since it was Hanafi, that the Shafi'is had no place. Not true. As a matter of fact, we have documented in our Shafi'i books at least 30 Shafi'i teachers were on salary in Mecca, around 20 in Medina. Salary from whom? From the government, taking care of their expenses. And in Egypt, there was countless Shafi'i schools. Az-Zarkashi, for example, used to teach at half of them, that are the ones in Cairo alone. So the claim that other schools had no presence during the Ottoman Empire is not true. Yes, in Qada, they had limited exposure. That is true. But as a school, as fatwa, it still remained. When nationalism came to the scene and schools were being shaped in accordance with nationalistic, liberal, or capitalistic ideologies, right? Western traditions, some Eastern that followed the Soviet Union, that became the dagger in the back of tamadhub. But it didn't stop tamadhub. You see, tamadhub continued. Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali. We continued, we thrived. As a matter of fact, the age that you are witnessing, if you are new to tamadhub, you are witnessing a revival of tamadhub. That wouldn't have been possible if everyone died off and everything ended. On the contrary, look at some mashayikh like Sheikh Abdul Aziz al-Shahawi in Egypt. You know what's unique about him? He's a Shafi'i sheikh, very well known. His father was also a Shafi'i sheikh. His grandfather and uncles were also Shafi'i mashayikh. Their teachers, which were their part of their family as well, still, were also Shafi'i. And guess what? Who did they study from? Al-Bajuri and the scholars of his time. The schools did not die off. They went a little dormant, sure, maybe away from the public scene somewhat. But I will say this. Days and many moons ago, when I first thought about getting married, I spoke to some brothers and mashayikh around me, So a brother said, there's an imam of a masjid that knows a sister that might be available for marriage. So I said, Alhamdulillah, mashallah. He said, you want to come and see? I was hesitant. I think I was 17 or 18 at the time, so you could understand the hesitation. Had a job, had a place, but still, I'm an American overseas, so you want to be cautious. You're following steps, right? Like, you're talking about a future, right? And someone else would be involved. But I went. Obviously, it never came to fruition. But the point that I'm trying to tell you is, I sit with the father. He says, so you're interested in getting married? I said, yes. He said, what's your book? I'm like, Quran? I didn't know where he was going with it. Remember, this is a layman, not students of knowledge. This is a layman. I said, the Quran? He said, no, I mean your fiqh book. time, I think I was like Umdat al-Salik maybe. I knew of some books here and there, other books. I knew of Minhaj, obviously. I said, Umdat al-Salik. Said, I don't know what that is. I said, okay. I said, uncle, what's your book? Let's cut to the chase. What do you want to get to exactly? So he takes out a book from underneath his pillow on the couch. I have no idea how he was hiding it behind the pillow or behind the cushion. Takes it out. And this old book. He said, this is the book that my father gave me. And his father gave him. And his father gave him. And as far back as I can remember, this has been passed down. Oldest son to oldest son. This is going to go to my son. This is my book. I take the book from his hand. And guess what it is? Matn Abi Shuja. I doubt that man could actually read the introduction of the book properly in Arabic. But the fact that he's holding on, as a layman, holding on, tells you that the madhahib, they didn't die. People lost their way. People are people. That happens. But the madhahib stayed present. And that's only Egypt. If we go to Yemen, it never ended. If we go to Tarim, it never ended. It is still present till this very moment, isn't it? If we go to different places in Russia, still the same thing. The Hanafi school still thrives in Pakistan, in India, and other places. As a matter of fact, even the Shafi'i school still thrives in India. Sure, it might dim down a little bit, light up at other times, but it's still there. In other Asian countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, South Africa, the Maliki madhab is still, it's thriving, it's alive, it's powerful. The Hanbali school, the Hanbali madhab went for a very long time not being taught at Azhar. And really, it was a response to certain groups and ideologies that tried to use it for their own benefit. Did it go away? No. As a matter of fact, the Hanbali Azhari scholars didn't go away. They continued to teach and educate. The Hanbalis in Iraq and in Sham and in Arabia still present. And I'm not speaking about certain groups and ideologies. I'm speaking about Hanbalis, nothing else. So the schools didn't go anywhere. As a matter of fact, we might even argue that even in Turkey, where Kemal Ataturk committed atrocities against Muslims, Hanafi school still thrives. Sure, certain degrees, it dims, it lights back up a little bit better. That's normal. But they have not gone anywhere. So how some mashayikh and editors and historians say the age where the madhahib went away, no. The age where the madhahib cooled down, dimmed down a little bit, we can simply call it a strategic regrouping. But they never went anywhere. They remained very strong, very solid, and very powerful. And I will show and share even more examples and maps bi'idhnillahi ta'ala in our next class. In our next session, we're going to cover each one of these stages in a little bit more depth and detail. We're going to see the usul of Imam al-Shafi'i. We're going to see the usul of the Shafi'iyya. We're going to be speaking, while we're going through these stages, about the creed of these scholars. Some misconceptions, some problems here and there, but overall, we're going to seal up everything with all of the details that are needed. If there is a need for a fourth session, we'll go ahead and do so. If there's a need for a fourth session where it's all Q&As about the Shafi'is, we'll do so. Feel free to discuss all of these possibilities in the Telegram group. We want to end these sessions with a full understanding or an overall understanding of fiqh pre-Imam al-Shafi'i, fiqh post-Imam al-Shafi'i, and the Shafi'i school and its history. So we can come out from this, start studying Shafi'i fiqh, continuing our studies, be able to start reading through the tabaqat, being able to recognize the different ages of our madhab and how the books might differ. Here we'll stop. I'll meet everyone again tomorrow inshallah ta'ala. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله تعالى لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. وإياكم.